Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yan Zhuo, and I'm a master computer science student. The title of my thesis is Liveness Checking of Streamlined Blockchain Consensus. In this thesis, I focused on the liveness violation detections in hot stuff family protocols. Sometimes we call them streamlined protocols, which rely on a leader to reach a linear lockstep execution. My research was supervised by Jeremy and Boujou, and I'm grateful for their guidance and help through this project. In this presentation, I will first provide an overview of this project with the motivation, the research questions, and my contributions. Then I will go through the previous work and discuss why they don't function. I will also introduce my approach and techniques to achieve this goal. Finally, I will present the results of my experiments and discuss future work. We know that BFT systems are designed to tolerate Byzantine attacks, such as equivocation and amnesia. The safety property ensures all correct processes always agree on the same value, whereas the liveness ensures that the protocol always progress. Safety violation is easy to detect because we can check their final decisions. However, the problem is that liveness violations are hard to test because developers may not know why the system does not progress. Existing time-bounded checking is hard to be used, especially when we have to set an exact correct time bound. Low bound values lead to false positives where a large bound incurs high running times. We should find a solution to effectively detect liveness violations with few false positives. So in this project, we mainly discuss three research questions. First, we do a literature review of recent BFT attacks and investigate their types, causes, and whether they can be tested. Then we should explore how can we adapt some liveness checking methods for detecting these violations. Finally, we should discuss how to practically apply our methods in the trains testing system and extend it to detect timing violations. So accordingly, we make the following contributions according to the research questions. Now, first, we present a summary and analysis of recently published BFT attacks in blockchain consensus protocols. Then we also define our notion of hot states for the hot stuff family protocols, and we present a variant of the lasso detection approach, which does not use a control scheduler. And finally, we describe how to extend the TRINS framework to apply these methods, and we evaluate the performance and compare their accuracy to the classical time-bounded liveness checking methods. Previous work mainly focused on CFT protocols. For example, Jepsen is a commonly used testing tool which checks the safety of distributed databases and consensus protocols by simulating network partitions. However, it is not designed for Byzantine consensus. Recently, in 2020, Facebook published strings. It systematically generates test cases with randomly partitioned network with a train node to act as a Byzantine node. For example, we can see that if a general has a train, it can propose a different values to different replicas if the network is partitioned. This is a common Byzantine behavior called equivocation. Now, let's look at the Turing's system architecture. A typical Turing system consists of a generator and an executor. The generator first produces all the possible network partitions and or possible leaders. If we have specified how many processes around, the generator randomly generates a lot of scenarios and feeds them into the executor. After running these scenarios parallelly, the results are saved to logs, and especially the buggy scenarios. To the best of our knowledge, we list existing literature in this table with their protocols, their types, the courses, and whether they have been tested and whether they have been fixed. For those attacks that we conjecture they can already be tested with strings, we tag it strings able. Some of the attacks that are out of our scope, we tag it a dash, and we can see that most safety violations can already be detected by strings, but liveness violations have not yet been detected. In this thesis, we focus on the HotStuff family protocols. HotStuff is a leader-based 3-phase commit protocol. It uses a locked block and a view number to ensure safety and liveness. As a streamlined protocol, HotStuff's normal case involves leader to replicas and replicas to leader communication. Its view change procedure is embedded in its normal case, and it usually runs a round-robin leader replacement. Now, HotStuff presents a liveness scenario in its 2-phase variant. This variant combines the pre-commit and commit phase into one single commit phase. Its liveness breaks under some bad scenarios. If correct protocols lock on conflicting blocks, for example, block 1 and block 2, they don't extend each other, they never get to execute or update their logs. For example, we can see that due to message losses, only P3 logs block 1, and after view change, due to some network partitions or asynchronous executions, P2 and P4 may lock on a new proposed block 2. In the next views, if a new proposal may not create a new column of votes because of conflicting logs, especially when the leader remains silent. The system fails to progress and is stuck in an infinite loop. Synchronous HotStuff is another variant which uses a delta time for synchronized networks. In its steady case, an honest leader keeps proposing and committing blocks every 2 delta times until a view change happens. When it votes on this is another phase of its view change phase. Whenever the replica votes on a block, it sets a local blame timer to 3 delta. If this timer expires and it does not receive any proposal, or it refuses to vote, or any equivocation behavior is detected, then it broadcasts a blame message. Upon receiving a column of blames, a process broadcasts the messages and stops voting, wait for an additional 2 delta, and finally change the view. Synchronized HotStuff can be violated by an existing attack called forced locking attack. This attack breaks both safety and liveness under some scenarios. For example, if some correct replicas, we call them F replica. We know that the quorum for synchronous hot stuff is 2F+1, so the quorum is F+1. This replica's timeout and they should view change. Just before they change their view, they receive some additional delayed Byzantine votes from malicious leaders. They are forced to create a new quorum and update their locked blocks, even though they already blame the current view. And if different honest replicas lock on conflicting blocks, the system may never be able to make progress in the future. Now let's introduce two liveness checking methods. These methods are built upon the notion of a hot state, which is a bad state that the system may not satisfy some properties or produce some useful results. Intuitively, the temperature checking method reports this, for example, these states are hot states. If a system stays in hot states longer than a specific temperature value, it will report a liveness violation. This method still requires us to set a specific temperature bound and may lead to false positives. Another method is called partial caching. It does not measure the bound of an execution. Instead, it detects the existence of a lasso, for example, the lasso between hot state S3 and S4. We partially cache the previous states, and each time a lasso is detected, we try to schedule the previous state transitions and check if this lasso can be repeated. For example, if we when we repeat this cycle, we see that the state is transitioned to S7 and it get rid of a hot state, then we don't see it is a liveness bug. Otherwise, we can call it an infinite bug. So in order to apply these methods, we should first give our definitions of system states. For each partial process state, we believe that hot stuff's local variables, the prepared blocks, the locked blocks, and the executed blocks are important to store, especially the locked block to measure the liveness property. The system state is defined as the set of states of all processes within the system. We map all of them into a state map. We calculate the hash of state map once and store it to test whether two states are equal based on their hash values. We see that a streamlined blockchain consensus system is in a hot state if it satisfies some conditions. The first condition is that the correct processes should hold two conflicting locked blocks. And the second condition is that there is no locked block to create a further quorum. And the third condition is that a correct process should not yet execute a block. Then we can make sure the system does not respond to client requests. For example, we can see that there are two groups of replicas locked on conflicting blocks. They never vote each other because their proposal does not extend their locked blocks. And we can see that all other votes, for example, this pink rectangle F+1 replicas do not vote, do not lock on any locked blocks, and they can't collect enough votes to create a new quorum. We have done some revisions to support our work. First, we prioritize scenarios because the generator can generate too many test cases, which reduces the efficiency of detecting bugs. For example, we only use 2 partitions with fixed sizes, which drops a lot of redundant scenarios. And we drop some duplicated replacing cases. For example, in this, when we generate the partition of this view, we do not distinguish honest replicas. We only distinguish the node 4 and its twin, and we always split twins into 2 partitions because we hope they can propose conflicting blocks or double votes in the same view. We also revise some implementations to adapt liveness checking techniques. The first problem is that the first problem is that synchronized hot stuff cannot be built upon twins because synchronized hot stuff's steady case uses the same leader to propose blocks every 2 delta until any equivocation or network delays causes a view change. However, our twins test cases run a lockstep execution. So we allocate enough periods of time per view so that messages generated by 2 views never coexist because we have already changed the view with a new view message. The steady case then can successfully proceed with a new leader and a new network partition, just like hot stuff. Another challenge is that the partial caching algorithm needs a controlled event scheduler to enforce executing some particular events and to schedule and repeat these executions. Unluckily, we know that twins lacks the ability to control the execution of protocols at message granularity because twins generate determined scenarios. It can't generate more scenarios in the flight. So we can't dynamically enforce the execution of a given cycle, for example, as R3 to R4, to check whether this lasso can be replayed. So in this thesis, we take a different method. We check for lassos on a global state transition graph of the system. In this graph, we record its state transitions and construct each scenario's result into this graph to represent the possible state system transitions that can occur during the execution. We update the graph after each new test execution with new states and new transitions. For example, a transition graph G1 keeps S0 transition to S1 and S2. If we run an additional test case in which we observe that the system moves from S2 to S1, then we extend the graph by adding this edge from S2 to S1. The resulting graph G2 right now contains a new cycle, which is a potential lasso in the execution. Cycles can have to be searched in our state transition graph. It is sufficient to search for cycles after the state transition graph has been executed by all the test cases. So for our evaluation, we build all our experiments on top of an open source hot stuff framework called Relab framework, Relab hot stuff. This framework implements a trained version of hot stuff and some testing suits. We also implement our own version of two-phase hot stuff and synchronous hot stuff, and we add a lot of additional modules to support our work. All the scenarios are configured with two network partition, four honest processes, and a twin process. We run 10 or 20 rounds, and we set the network delay of hot stuff to 10 milliseconds. The delta of hot stuff is set to be 50 milliseconds because we after testing we believe this setting runs fast enough without any concurrency issue because we have to parallelly update our global graph. For each configuration, we randomly execute thousands of test cases and we report the average execution time for each scenario into this table. The times required to execute a scenario with synchronous hot stuff is longer than regular hot stuff because synchronous hot stuff requires longer network delays and malicious delaying by the adversary. We also define our baseline time bounds according to this table. The time bound is set for checking our baseline method. If a protocol does not commit any blocks or send any response in time, it will be associated with a liveness violation. We believe that this small bound and mid bound and the large bounds rebounds have already covered most of the cases due to the Gaussian distribution. We observe our false positives by checking whether there are really two conflict chains in the system so that it cannot make progress. In our evaluation, we consider an execution to be a false positive if we can't identify two conflicting blocks in our states, or if there are two conflicting locked blocks, for example, P1 and P2 lock block 1 and P2, P3 and P4 lock block 2. However, they should extend each other. In this scenario, in this case, the safe node safe node rule in hot stuff still allows this system to progress. Okay, this table lists the results of testing the hot stuff protocol with 10,000 randomly selected testing scenarios, and we check the liveness use temperature lasso detected and the baseline time bounded checking. The threshold is the bound value, the bound we calculated. The trace length means the average round we found a bug. A dash means that we do not require to fill this blank. For the temperature method, we estimate this bound to 5 rounds because after we we experiment a lot of test cases. We believe that 5 rounds can already manifest a liveness bug. We can see that the temperature and the lasso-based methods did not report any violations, but our baseline reported lots of violations. We know that basic hot stuff is safe and liveness, so these bugs are all false positives. So similar to the results for hot stuff, we observe that time-bounded liveness checking methods provide a larger amount of false positives than lasso-based methods. When we increase the time bound, we can see that the false positives really decrease, and when we vary different temperature values, we can see that the checking the bucket rate of liveness violations also decrease because some scenarios may not stay in hot states for so long. We can see that our baseline time-bounded checking also introduce a lot of time consumption. Yeah, because we set the time bound is so large. And finally, we reinstate the forced locking attack in synchronous hot stuff. Then we can see that there are some safety violations in test scenarios. We reduce the number of test cases, so we can see that the execution time is shorter because synchronous hot stuff is so slow. We checked this higher false positive rate from the adaptations of our synchronous hot stuff. For example, the temperature method or lasso detection method, it can report about 2% of false positives. Yes, because this is the scenario listed in our false positive analysis, that some due to synchronized hot stuff has malicious delaying, some information of blockchain may not be updated in time, so that some states are falsely marked as buggy scenarios. So we can conclude our thesis by answering 3 research questions we asked. We dive into BFD protocols and analyze their susceptibility to safety or liveness violations. We believe that our findings have already covered most of the Byzantine behaviors. We have also adapted temperature and lasso detection liveness checking techniques to streamline Byzantine consensus protocols for the first time, and these methods lead to fewer false positives than time-bounded baseline. And we also demonstrate that the implementation of these methods on top of TWINS is successful, and we can detect the existing liveness bugs. Our work still has some limitations. Future work should explore more different types of liveness violations for different protocols. For example, non-lockstep protocols or some asynchronous protocols. And we also, we extend TWINS to detect timing violations, but the granularity is still coarse. We may refine it to a better granularity or apply more pairs of strings, we can test a lot of different configurations. Okay, this is my presentation. Thank you, TDEFT. And my next station is Sheen.